Ever get the feeling like deep down there's this other way of figuring things out? Not just thinking our way through, but really feeling it.
It's funny you should say that because that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're exploring this intriguing idea from the 40 Rules of Love. It really throws a curveball at how we usually approach, well, truth. The path to truth, it suggests, isn't really a head thing, it's a heart thing.
Okay, now that's interesting. It almost feels counterintuitive, right? In a world that's constantly telling us to think, analyze, strategize, this rule is saying, hold on a sec, what about your heart? What's it telling you?
Exactly. And the rule itself is pretty powerful. The path to the truth is a labor of the heart, not of the head. Full stop. It's like a wake-up call.
It is, and it's so tempting to just breeze past a statement like that, but this is a deep dive, right? So let's unpack it. It goes on. Make your heart your primary guide, not your mind. Okay, so how do we even begin to do that? Isn't the mind like our default setting?
You're hitting on something really important, that tension between the heart and the head. We're conditioned to think our way through life, to rely on logic. But what this rule is suggesting is that the heart might have its own kind of knowing.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I also feel like I need a bit of a roadmap here. How do we actually start listening to our hearts? Like, practically speaking, what does that even look like?
I'll think about it this way. Have you ever had a gut feeling about something, maybe a decision you needed to make, where your head was saying one thing, but your heart was whispering something else entirely?
Oh, all the time. Like
Well,
that time, this is a little embarrassing, but it's relevant, I promise. I was about to back out of this weekend trip at the last minute because logically it made no sense. Too much work, not enough time. But I had this like deep down urge to just go for it. And you know what? It ended up being one of the most incredible recharging weekends ever.
and that, my friend, is the heart speaking. It's those moments of intuition, of deep knowing that defies logic, those gut feelings that tell us to go for it, even when our minds are building a case for why we shouldn't.
Wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense. But then there's this other part of the rule. It gets even more intense. Meet, challenge, and ultimately prevail over your nafs with your heart.
Right. And that word nafs, it's not one we throw around every day. It's a Sufi term, and it essentially refers to our ego or lower self, that part of us that's driven by desires, insecurities, fears.
Okay, so how does the heart come into play with all of that? The ego, the nafs, it can be pretty powerful. Believe me, I know.
That it can. But think of it like this. The heart, with its capacity for compassion, empathy, understanding those qualities are like superpowers when it comes to navigating the choppy waters of the ego. It's about recognizing those ego-driven impulses, those fears and insecurities, and meeting them with, well, heart.
That's pretty profound when you think about it. It's like we're not trying to suppress or ignore the ego, but to understand it, maybe even befriend it through the lens of the heart.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final part of this rule, which takes us even deeper. Knowing your ego will lead you to the knowledge of God.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, but potentially tricky too. Because what about those of us who don't necessarily subscribe to a specific religion or belief system?
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of this quote. It speaks to something universal. Whether or not you believe in a God in a traditional sense, this idea of knowing God can be understood as connecting to something larger than ourselves, something beyond our individual egos. That could be a sense of oneness, of interconnectedness, of profound love, of universal truth, whatever resonates.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. So if we were to put this all together, this idea of the heart as a path to truth, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to remember that we all have this incredible tool within us, our hearts. And while our minds are incredibly powerful and useful, there's a different kind of wisdom that resides in the heart. It's about tapping into that wisdom, about letting our hearts be our compass, our guide.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we were to truly let our hearts lead the way, even for a day, how might our lives be different? What would we say yes to? What fears might we overcome? It's an invitation to explore, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And perhaps, just perhaps, on that journey of exploration, we might stumble upon truths about ourselves and about the world around us that we never could have imagined.